I didn't mean to start watching him. It just happened. At first, Vincent was just the new guy in the building. The kind of neighbor you notice once while carrying groceries or passing in the hallway, exchange a quick nod with, and then forget about 5 minutes later. Except I didn't forget him, because the next day I saw him again. Not in the hallway this time, but down by the pool. Our building had this small, almost pointless pool in the courtyard. Most people ignored it. It was more decorative than anything. But Vincent, he treated it like his own private escape. The first time I really noticed him, he was lying on one of the loungers, shirt off, completely relaxed, a book held just above his face. Sunlight hit him in that effortless way that made everything look sharper, cleaner, like a scene from something I wasn't supposed to be part of. I remember standing at my window, coffee in hand, pretending I wasn't staring. I told myself it was normal. New neighbor, curiosity, that's it. But then it kept happening. Every morning around the same time, Vincent would show up by the pool. Same lounger. Same calm, quiet energy. Sometimes he'd read for hours. Sometimes he'd just lie there, eyes closed, like the rest of the world didn't exist. And every time, without fail, I'd end up at my window, watching. I didn't know anything about him except his name. I'd overheard someone call him Vincent once, and the fact that he seemed completely comfortable in his own skin, which, for some reason, made me painfully aware of how uncomfortable I was in mine. I'm Andrew, by the way, 23, working a job that sounded better on paper than it felt in real life, living alone in an apartment that was way too quiet for someone who couldn't stop overthinking. Most days blurred together: emails, deadlines, half-finished meals, scrolling through my phone just to avoid sitting with my own thoughts. But then there was Vincent, and somehow watching him became part of my routine. Not in a dramatic way. It wasn't like I planned it. It was small things. Making coffee a little slower. Accidentally stopping by the window, checking the time and realizing, yeah, he'd probably be out there now. And he usually was. There was something calming about it. The way he'd flip a page, stretch slightly, adjust his position without even thinking about it. No rush, no stress, just existing. It made everything else feel quieter for a while. But it also made something else happen. Something I didn't really want to admit. I started paying attention to details. The way his hair fell slightly over his forehead when he looked down at his book. The way his shoulders shifted when he stretched. The way he'd sometimes pause mid-page, staring off like he got lost in his thoughts. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that I was just bored, that this wasn't what it looked like. Because as far as I knew, Vincent was straight. He had that easy confidence, the kind that came from never having to question things. I'd seen him once or twice talking to girls near the entrance, casual, relaxed, like it was second nature. And me? I stayed upstairs, watching from a distance, safe, until one afternoon, that distance disappeared. It was hotter than usual, the kind of day where even breathing felt slow. I had my laptop open, trying to work, but my focus kept slipping. So yeah, I checked the window again. Vincent was there, but not reading this time. The book was resting on his chest, one hand loosely holding it in place. And his head was tilted slightly upward, toward my building, toward my window, toward me. I froze. First, I thought it was nothing, that he was just staring at the sky or zoning out. But then he shifted, just enough, like he was adjusting his angle, like he was trying to see better. My stomach dropped. There was no way he could actually see me, right? Still, instinct kicked in. I stepped back from the window so fast I nearly knocked over my coffee. My heart was beating harder than it should have been for something so small. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the wall, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. But the feeling didn't go away. That quiet, steady certainty that something had changed. Because for the first time since all of this started, it didn't feel like I was the only one watching. And that thought stayed with me the rest of the day. Long after Vincent left the pool. Long after the sun went down. Long after I tried and failed to focus on anything else. Because now there was a new question stuck in my head. One I couldn't ignore. Did he know? That question didn't leave me alone. Did he know? Sounds stupid now, but back then it felt huge. Like everything suddenly depended on the answer. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I had to, because I wanted to check. I told myself I wouldn't go straight to the window, that I'd act normal. Make coffee, scroll my phone, maybe even open my laptop like a functioning adult. Yeah, that lasted about 30 seconds. I walked straight to the window, and there he was, Vincent. Same lounger, same spot, same damn book. Like nothing had changed. But something had. Because this time I didn't feel invisible anymore. I hesitated before stepping closer, like there was some kind of invisible line I wasn't supposed to cross. My hand tightened slightly around the edge of the counter as I leaned just enough to see him clearly. He looked exactly like he always did, relaxed, focused, completely absorbed in whatever he was reading, which should have made me feel better. But it didn't, because now I was hyper-aware of everything. Every small movement, every shift of his head, every pause, like I was waiting for him to look up again, to confirm it, or to prove me wrong. A few minutes passed. Nothing. He turned a page, adjusted his position slightly, ran a hand through his hair like it was second nature. Normal. Everything was normal. I exhaled quietly, feeling a bit ridiculous. See? You're overthinking it. I was just about to step away when he moved. Not much. Just enough. His hand stilled on the page, his head tilting ever so slightly upward. And then, he looked directly at my window. This time there was no doubt, no maybe, no excuse. My chest tightened instantly. I didn't even step back right away. I just stood there, frozen, staring back like an idiot who forgot how to function. There was distance between us, sure, but it didn't feel like it. It felt close, too close, like somehow, across that courtyard, through glass and sunlight and space, he could actually see me. And then, he didn't look away. That's what got me. He didn't flinch, didn't act like it was accidental. He just held it, for a second, too long enough for my brain to short-circuit. And then, slowly, almost casually, he shifted his gaze back down to his book. Like nothing happened. Like that moment didn't exist. But it did. And I felt it everywhere. I finally snapped out of it and stepped back, my heart pounding harder than it should have been. My face felt warm, like I'd just been caught doing something I couldn't explain. Because I had. I ran a hand through my hair. Pacing once across the kitchen like that would somehow reset everything. Okay, so what does that mean? Was it coincidence? No way. Not twice. He knew. Or at least, he suspected. And somehow that made everything worse. Or better. I still hadn't decided. The rest of the day was a mess. I couldn't focus on work. Couldn't sit still. My brain kept replaying that moment over and over again, the way he looked up, the way he didn't look away immediately. Like he wasn't surprised. Like he'd been expecting it. That thought hit differently. Because if he knew, then how long? How many times had he noticed me standing there, watching? I let out a slow breath, rubbing my face. This is getting weird, I muttered to myself. And it was. But the worst part? I didn't want it to stop. That evening, I found myself back at the window again. Not even pretending this time. Just standing there, staring down at the empty pool area. Waiting, which was insane. Because what exactly was I waiting for? Him to come back? To look up again? To what? Prove something? I didn't have an answer. But I stayed there anyway. Until finally, the courtyard door opened. And Vincent walked out. My pulse spiked instantly. He wasn't carrying a book this time. That was the first thing I noticed. The second, he didn't go to the lounger. He stopped, right in the middle of the courtyard. And for a second he just stood there. Then slowly, he looked up, right at my window. No hesitation, no pretending, just direct, intentional. And this time, he smiled. Not big, not obvious, just a small, almost knowing curve of his lips. Like he'd just confirmed something. My stomach dropped. Because in that moment, I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit before. This wasn't one-sided anymore. Not even close. That smile messed me up more than anything else. If he had looked away, if he'd acted confused or annoyed, I probably would have stopped right there. Closed the blinds, avoided the window, pretended none of this ever happened. But he didn't. He smiled, like he knew exactly what was going on. Like he wasn't uncomfortable. Like he was okay with it. That was the part one couldn't shake. I stood there for a few seconds after it happened, completely frozen, watching him like my brain hadn't caught up yet. Vincent didn't move right away. He just stayed there in the courtyard, looking up at me, that same calm expression on his face like this was the most normal thing in the world. Then slowly he lifted his hand. Not a full wave, just a small, subtle motion. Acknowledgement. My chest tightened instantly. There it was. No more guessing. No more maybe he doesn't know. He knew, and he wasn't stopping it. I swallowed hard, my hand instinctively tightening against the window frame. For a second, I thought about stepping back, pretending I hadn't seen it, but that felt pointless. Too late for that. So instead, awkwardly like I had no idea how to be a normal human, I raised my hand back. Just a little, barely anything, but enough. Vincent's smile shifted slightly, like he found that funny. Not in a mocking way, more like amused. Then, just like that, he dropped his hand, turned, and walked over to the lounger like nothing happened. Like we hadn't just silently confirmed something that had been building for days. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Okay, I muttered under my breath. Okay, what the hell is this? Because now everything was different. Before I was just watching. Now it felt like I was being allowed to watch. And that changed the dynamic completely. The next few days were strange. Not in a bad way, just charged. Vincent kept showing up at the pool like usual. Same routine, same book, same quiet presence. But now, every once in a while, he'd glance up. Not always directly at me. Sometimes just in my direction. Sometimes quick. Sometimes lingering a second too long. And every time, my body reacted before my brain could catch up. A small pause. A shift in my breathing. That same tight feeling in my chest. It became this silent back and forth. No words. No actual interaction. But definitely not nothing. And the worst part? I started looking forward to it. Which I really shouldn't have. Because I still didn't actually know him. All I had was a name, a few exchanged looks, and a growing feeling that I was stepping into something I didn't fully understand. But I couldn't stop. One afternoon, everything escalated again. I had just finished a call for work and, out of pure habit at this point, drifted toward the window. Vincent was already there. Of course he was. But this time, instead of lying down, he was sitting on the edge of the lounger, elbows resting on his knees, looking distracted. No book, just staring ahead. I leaned slightly closer to the glass, studying him without even thinking about it. Something felt off, different, and then he turned his head, slowly, deliberately, and looked straight at me. No hesitation, no subtlety, just direct. My breath caught. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he did something new, something that made my brain completely short-circuit. He tilted his head slightly and gestured, a small movement of his hand. Not random, not vague, clear, intentional. He was signaling me. My stomach dropped. There was no way I was misunderstanding that. He was telling me to come down. I blinked, genuinely unsure if I just imagined it. But then he did it again. Same motion, same calm expression, like he wasn't even questioning whether I'd come or not. Like he already knew the answer. My heart started pounding harder. This was different. Watching from a distance was one thing. This meant actually talking to him. Being seen up close. I hesitated. For a few seconds, I just stood there, frozen in place, my mind racing through every possible outcome. What if it's awkward? What if I've completely misread everything? What if? He raised an eyebrow slightly, still looking right at me, waiting. And that was it. That tiny shift, the patience, the confidence, it pushed something in me. Before I could overthink it again, I stepped back from the window, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. My heart was racing the entire way down. Each step felt louder than it should have, like I was walking toward something I couldn't take back. By the time I reached the courtyard door, I paused for half a second, my hand on the handle. Then I pushed it open. The warm air hit me instantly, and so did the reality of it. Vincent was right there, closer than he'd ever been before. And now, there was nowhere to hide. The first thing I noticed was how different everything felt up close. From my window, Vincent had always seemed distant, like a scene I wasn't really part of, something I could observe without being pulled into it. But standing there, just a few steps away from him, that illusion disappeared fast. He looked up as I approached, like he'd been expecting me the whole time. No surprise, no awkwardness, just that same calm, steady presence. Up close, it was worse, or better, definitely more intense. "Hey," he said, voice low, casual like we'd already had 100 conversations before this. I nodded, trying to act like my heart wasn't doing something completely unreasonable. "Hey." "Great. Smooth. Real impressive, Andrew." For a second, neither of us said anything. The kind of silence that isn't exactly uncomfortable but definitely not neutral either. His eyes flicked over me briefly, not in a judging way, more like he was taking me in, confirming something. Then his lips curved slightly. "You always watch from the window," he said. Not a question. A statement. My stomach dropped. There it was. No pretending anymore. I let out a short breath, glancing away for half a second before forcing myself to meet his eyes again. "Yeah," I admitted. No point lying now. He didn't react the way I expected. No teasing. No weird tension. If anything, he seemed amused. "Figured," he said, leaning back slightly on his hands. "You're not exactly subtle." I huffed out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "Good to know." There was a beat. Then I added, "You noticed the whole time?" Vincent tilted his head a little, like he was thinking about it. "Not at first," he said. "But after a couple days?" "Yeah, of course. Of course he did." "And you just—" I hesitated, gesturing vaguely. "Let it happen?" That was the part one didn't understand. Anyone else would have said something, or avoided me, or at least made it awkward enough for me to stop. But he didn't. Vincent's expression shifted slightly, something quieter, more thoughtful. "I didn't mind," he said simply. That hit harder than it should have. I blinked, caught off guard. "You didn't mind," I repeated. He shrugged lightly. "You weren't being weird about it." I almost laughed at that. "I was literally staring at you." "Yeah," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips, but not in a creepy way. I raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't make sense." "It does," he replied easily. "There's a difference." I didn't even know how to respond to that, because part of me understood exactly what he meant, and part of me didn't want to look too closely at it. There was another pause, this one heavier, more aware. Vincent shifted slightly, sitting up straighter now, his attention fully on me. "So," he said, "you gonna keep watching from up there, or?" He let the question hang, unfinished, but clear. My pulse picked up again. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Or what?" His eyes held mine for a second longer than necessary. Then, "Or you could just come down," he said. Something about the way he said it, calm, confident, like it was the most obvious option in the world, made my chest tighten again. Because that's exactly what I had just done. And now we were here, standing in it. No distance, no glass, no pretending. I let out a slow breath. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I guess I could." Vincent's smile deepened just slightly. Not big, not dramatic, but enough. And for some reason, that small shift felt like the start of something I wasn't ready to name yet. He reached over, picking up his book from the lounger, then paused. "Andrew, right?" I blinked. "Yeah." So he did know. "Good," he said, like that confirmed something for him. Then he nodded toward the empty lounger next to him. "Sit." Simple. Direct. No pressure. But somehow it felt like more than that. I hesitated for half a second. Then, I sat down, right next to him, close enough to feel the heat from his skin in the afternoon sun, close enough to realize this wasn't just something happening in my head anymore. And as he leaned back again, opening his book like this was completely normal. I had a feeling things weren't going to stay simple for long. Sitting next to him felt unreal. Not in some dramatic, movie-like way. Just in that quiet, almost disorienting way where your brain keeps reminding you, this wasn't supposed to happen like this. A few days ago, I was watching him from behind glass. Now I was right next to him, close enough to hear his breathing, close enough to notice things I hadn't from a distance, like the faint crease between his brows when he focused on a page, or the way his fingers tapped lightly against the book without him realizing it. And somehow that made it harder to act normal. Vincent didn't seem affected at all. He leaned back against the lounger, one arm behind his head again. The other holding the book open like this was just another ordinary afternoon. Like I hadn't just crossed a line. Like he hadn't invited me to. For a minute, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty, though. It was aware. I shifted slightly in my seat, trying to relax, but every small movement felt amplified. My arm brushed the side of the lounger, my leg adjusting just enough to remind me how close we actually were. Too close to pretend this was casual. "You're quieter in person," Vincent said suddenly. I blinked, turning my head toward him. "Yeah, He didn't look up from his book. "Up there. You looked like you had a lot going on." I let out a short breath. "That's because I did." That got a small reaction. The corner of his mouth lifted, just barely. I could tell. There was something about the way he said it, like he'd been paying more attention than I realized. That thought sat with me for a second. "You were watching me back," I said before I could stop myself. This time he did look at me. Slowly. Deliberately. Sometimes. No hesitation. No denial. Just honest. My chest tightened again. "Why?" I asked. I wasn't even sure I wanted the answer. Vincent studied me for a second, like he was deciding how much to say. Then he shrugged lightly. "You were there," he said. "Hard to ignore." "That's not really an answer." "It is," he replied calmly. "Just not the one you want." I huffed quietly, looking away for a second. He wasn't wrong. There was a pause. Then, "You gonna tell me why you were watching?" he added. That question hit differently, because up until now I hadn't really said it out loud. Not to him, not even to myself, if I was being honest. I rubbed the back of my neck, buying myself a second. "I don't know," I said finally. Vincent raised an eyebrow slightly. "Really? Not in a simple way," I clarified. That seemed to interest him more. He shifted slightly, closing his book this time but keeping his finger between the pages like he wasn't fully done with it. "Try me." I hesitated. Because how do you explain something like that without making it weird? Without making it too real? I exhaled slowly. It was just, I searched for the words. "You seemed calm." Vincent didn't interrupt. Didn't react. Just listened. "And everything else in my life wasn't," I added. That felt closer to the truth than anything else I'd told myself before. He nodded once, like that made sense to him. "That's it?" he asked. I let out a quiet laugh. No, of course it wasn't. But saying the rest out loud? That felt like stepping into something deeper. Still, I didn't look away this time. "You're easy to look at," I said. There it was. Simple, honest, and way more exposed than anything I'd said so far. For a second, Vincent didn't react. Then, that same small smile. But this time, it lingered longer. "Yeah?" he said, not surprised, just acknowledging it. "Yeah," I repeated, my voice quieter now. Something shifted between us after that. Subtle, but real. Vincent leaned back again, more relaxed now, like the conversation had settled into something more comfortable. But his attention didn't go back to the book. It stayed on me, and that felt different. "You always this honest?" he asked. "Not usually." "Why now?" I met his eyes, because at this point there wasn't much point in holding back. "You asked me to come down," I said. That seemed to land. He held my gaze for a second, something unreadable flickering in his expression. Then he nodded slightly. Fair. Another pause. But this one felt heavier, more charged, because now everything was out in the open. No pretending, no guessing. Just two people sitting too close to each other, both aware of something neither of us had named yet. Vincent shifted again, this time turning slightly toward me. Not fully, just enough. You know I'm straight, right? He said. There it was. The line. Clear. Direct. I felt it immediately, but I didn't look away. Yeah, I said, because I did. I always had. And you still came down, he added. I let out a slow breath. Yeah. Another beat. His eyes searched mine, like he was trying to figure something out, or maybe confirm it. Then quieter. You're still here. Not a question. Just a fact. And for some reason, that hit harder than anything else he'd said. Because I didn't move, didn't step back, didn't make an excuse. I just sat there, right next to him, close enough that it felt impossible to pretend this was nothing anymore. Yeah, I said again, and this time, it meant more. That should have been the moment I got up and left. Honestly, if there was ever a clear exit, that was it. You know I'm straight, right? Normal people hear that and take the hint. Create distance. Laugh it off. Go back upstairs and pretend this was just a weird, harmless interaction that didn't mean anything. But I didn't move. And neither did he. That was the part that didn't make sense. Vincent had drawn the line, but he hadn't stepped away from it. If anything, he was sitting closer now. Not obviously. Just enough that I noticed. Just enough that it mattered. I let out a quiet breath, staring ahead at the pool for a second, trying to steady my thoughts. You keep saying that, I said finally. He tilted his head slightly. Saying what? That you're straight. It wasn't confrontational. Just honest. Vincent watched me for a moment like he was deciding how to respond. Because I am, he said. Simple. Direct. No hesitation. I nodded slowly. I believe you. That wasn't the issue. It never had been. The issue was everything else. The way he looked at me. The way he noticed me. The way he didn't shut this down when he easily could have. I turned my head slightly, meeting his eyes again. But you're still here too, I added. That landed. I saw it in the subtle shift in his expression. Not discomfort, not denial, just awareness. For a second, neither of us said anything. The air felt heavier now, thicker, like something was building, even if neither of us was saying it out loud. Vincent exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair before leaning forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. You're overthinking it, he said. I let out a quiet laugh. Yeah, I admitted. I do that. I noticed. Of course he did. Another pause. Then, it's not that complicated, he continued. I saw you watching. I didn't mind. So I let it happen. I nodded slightly. That part one get. Good. But this, I gestured vaguely between us. This is different. That made him look at me again. More directly this time. Is it? He asked. There was something in his tone. Not defensive. More like curious. Like he genuinely wanted to know what I thought. I swallowed, trying to put it into words. You invited me down, I said. Yeah. You keep looking at me like that. Like what? I hesitated, then decided to just say it. Like this isn't nothing. Silence. Real silence this time. Vincent didn't answer right away. Didn't look away either. He just held my gaze. And for the first time since I'd come down here, I saw something shift in him. Something less controlled. Less neutral. More real. Maybe it's not, he said quietly. That hit harder than anything else so far. Because that wasn't a joke. Wasn't deflection. That was the first time he'd met me there. My chest tightened, my pulse picking up again. Then what is it? I asked. He let out a slow breath, looking away for a second like he actually needed to think about it. That alone told me everything. Vincent wasn't confused about who he was. But this wasn't something he'd planned either. I don't know, he said finally. Honest, simple, real. And somehow, that made it even more intense. Because now we were both in the same place. Not knowing, just feeling it. The space between us felt smaller now. Not physically, but something had shifted. Like the distance that used to exist clear, defined was gone. Replaced with something undefined. Unstable, but impossible to ignore. Vincent leaned back again. Slower this time. His arm brushing lightly against mine as he moved. It wasn't a big touch. Barely anything. But it was enough. Enough to make my entire body go still for a second. I didn't pull away. Neither did he. And neither of us commented on it. But we both noticed. I could tell. Because his gaze flicked to where our arms were for just a split second before returning to my face. That tiny detail said more than words could. "You're not leaving," he said. Again, not a question. I shook my head slightly. No. Another beat. His jaw tightened just a little. Like he was thinking. Deciding something. Then, good. That one word settled deep. Because it wasn't casual. It wasn't neutral. It meant something. And I felt it. Right there in my chest. We stayed like that for a while. Sitting too close. Not touching except for those small, almost accidental moments. But not pulling away either. And at some point, I realized something I hadn't fully admitted yet. This wasn't just me watching him anymore. And it wasn't just him letting it happen. This was something we were both stepping into. Slowly. Carefully. But definitely not accidentally. And the more time passed, the less it felt like either of us was going to stop it. At some point, the silence stopped feeling accidental. It wasn't just two people sitting next to each other anymore. It was something else. Something heavier. More aware. I leaned back slightly, mirroring his position without really thinking about it. The sun had shifted lower, casting longer shadows across the courtyard. But neither of us had moved to leave. Which said enough on its own. Vincent was still close. Not touching. But not touching either. That weird in-between space where every small movement mattered more than it should. "You do this with everyone?" I asked after a while. My voice came out quieter than I intended. He glanced at me. "Do what?" "This," I said, gesturing slightly between us again. "Let things just happen like this." Vincent huffed a faint breath through his nose, like the question amused him. "No. Simple. Immediate. That shouldn't have mattered as much as it did. But it did." "Good," I said before I could stop myself. That made him look at me again. More directly. "And why's that?" he asked. I held his gaze this time. "Because I don't think I'd be handling it very well if you did." That was probably the most honest thing I'd said all day. And definitely the most dangerous. Something in his expression shifted again. Subtle, but real. "Handling what?" he pressed. I exhaled slowly. "You know what?" He did. I could tell. Because he didn't push it further. Didn't joke. Didn't brush it off. He just sat with it. With me. And that silence between us? It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of things we weren't saying. Vincent shifted slightly, turning his body just a bit more toward me now. Not all the way, but enough that I felt it. Enough that it changed the angle. Changed the dynamic. "You're making it a bigger deal than it is," he said. But his voice wasn't as firm as before. Less certain. I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "I think you're making it smaller." That landed. I saw it. Felt it. Because for a second, Vincent didn't have a response ready. And that wasn't like him. The air between us tightened. Not in a bad way. Just more intense. More real. "Andrew," he said, slower this time. And the way he said my name. It wasn't casual anymore. I felt it in my chest instantly. "Yeah," I replied. He hesitated. Just for a second. Like he was choosing his next move carefully. Which, again, told me everything. "You don't even know me," he said. That wasn't a rejection. Not really. Sounded more like a warning. Or maybe a reminder. I nodded slightly. "I know enough. That's not how that works." "Maybe not," I said. "But it's still happening." There it was. No more dancing around it. No more pretending this was just curiosity or boredom or coincidence. This was something, and we were both in it. Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. His eyes flicked down for a split second, just enough to notice how close we were. Then back up to me. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, it is." That was it. That was the moment. The one where neither of us denied it anymore. And once that line was crossed, everything felt different. The space between us felt smaller again. Not physically, but something shifted. Like the tension had nowhere else to go now. My hand rested against the edge of the lounger, fingers slightly curled. I didn't move it, but I was aware of how close it was to his. Too close. Close enough that if either of us shifted just a little, that would be it. I didn't look down. Didn't want to break whatever this was. But I felt it. That pull. That quiet, steady gravity between us. Vincent exhaled slowly, like he felt it too. His hand shifted slightly. Just enough. Not a full movement. Just a brush. Barely there. But intentional. I felt it instantly. Every nerve in my body reacted like it was something bigger than it should have been. Neither of us pulled away. And that was the part that mattered. Because now it wasn't accidental anymore. That tiny point of contact stayed. Neither growing, nor disappearing. Just there. Balanced on the edge of something neither of us had fully stepped into yet. But we were close. Too close. Vincent's voice came out lower this time. "Still overthinking?" I let out a quiet breath. "Yeah," I admitted. A small pause. Then softer. But not enough to leave. That made something flicker in his eyes. Something deeper. Something that hadn't been there before. And this time, he didn't hide it. That look in his eyes. That was the moment everything stopped being vague. Up until now, we'd been circling it. Feeling it. Testing it. But not fully stepping into it. Now, there was no distance left to hide behind. We were sitting too close, hands barely touching. Both aware of it and neither of us pulling away. Vincent's gaze dropped for just a second. To where our hands were. Then back to my face. And this time, he didn't pretend it meant nothing. "You're really not gonna back off, are you?" he said quietly. Not annoyed. Not judgmental. Just real. I shook my head. "No." My voice was steady. More than I expected. Because at this point, it didn't feel like a choice anymore. It felt like something I'd already decided without realizing it. He exhaled slowly, leaning back just a little, but his hand didn't move. If anything, it stayed right where it was. Close. Warm. Present. "You're making this complicated," he said. But again, there was no real push behind it. I let out a small breath. "You keep saying that," I replied. "But you're still here." That hit. I saw it again, that flicker. That hesitation he couldn't fully hide anymore. Because he knew I was right. If this really meant nothing, he would have stopped it already. But he didn't. And that mattered more than anything he said. A few seconds passed. Quiet. Heavy. Then Vincent did something that changed everything. He shifted his hand. Not away. Closer. Just enough that our fingers actually brushed this time. Fully. No ambiguity. No accidental excuse. It was intentional. My breath caught. And I didn't move. Didn't pull back. Didn't break it. Neither did he. We stayed like that for a second. Two. Long enough for it to settle into something real. Then slowly, he turned his head toward me again. Closer than before. And this time, there was no distance left in his expression. No pretending. No, this is simple. Just him. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. I swallowed. Yeah. Yeah. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard before. Something softer. Less controlled. "And what did you expect?" I asked. He held my gaze. A guy who'd stay behind the window. That made my chest tighten. Because yeah, that was who I was. Until now. I let out a small breath. Guess I got tired of watching. That landed. I could see it. Feel it. Because the space between us shifted again. Even though we hadn't moved. Vincent's eyes flicked to my lips for just a second. Quick. But not quick enough to miss. And that That changed the air completely. My heart started pounding again. Louder this time. He noticed. Of course he did. But he didn't step back. Didn't make a joke. Didn't break it. Instead, he leaned in slightly. Not all the way. Just enough to close the space a little more. Like he was giving me the choice. Not taking it. And that mattered more than anything. I felt it immediately. That quiet, steady pull. The same one that had been building since the first time I saw him by the pool. Only now, there was nothing in the way. No glass. No distance. No pretending. Just this. Right here. I didn't overthink it. For once, I didn't hesitate. I moved. Just a little. Enough to meet him halfway. And then, we stopped. Right there. Close enough to feel each other's breath. Close enough that one more inch would change everything. Vincent's voice came out low. Almost a whisper. You sure? That question wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was about everything. About crossing the line. About what came after. And for the first time since this started, I didn't doubt myself. Yeah, I said. Simple. Certain. That was all it took. Because the next second, he closed the distance. And everything that had been building slowly, quietly, over all those days, finally stopped being just a thought.